Question 1. Upon reviewing a traffic stop in Las Vegas, Nevada, an LVMPD officer has a hunch that the driver may be in possession of contraband. The officer has not observed any traffic violations beyond the initial reason for the stop, nor has the officer developed any articulable facts to support a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The officer approaches the vehicle and wishes to search it. Which of the following actions best represent the appropriate and lawful course of conduct for the officer? Option A. The officer implies that a search is a standard procedure for this type of stop, and that refusal might lead to further complications. Option B. The officer proceeds to search the vehicle based on their hunch, believing it is better to ask for forgiveness than permission. Option C. The officer informs the driver that they have the right to refuse consent to a search of their vehicle and proceeds with the search only if voluntary consent is explicitly given. Option D. The officer detains the driver for an extended period, hoping they will eventually consent to a search to end the interaction. The correct answer is C. The officer informs the driver that they have the right to refuse consent to a search of their vehicle and proceeds with the search only if voluntary consent is explicitly given. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an LVMPD officer due to the inherent tension between the need to gather information for an investigation and the constitutional rights of individuals. Balancing effective law enforcement with the protection of privacy and due process requires careful judgment and adherence to established legal standards. The officer must act within the bounds of the law to ensure any evidence obtained is admissible and that the rights of the individual are not violated. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly articulating the probable cause for the stop to the individual, informing them of their right to refuse consent to a search, and then proceeding with the search only if voluntary consent is given. This approach is correct because it respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. Obtaining voluntary consent is a legally recognized exception to the warrant requirement. By informing the individual of their right to refuse, the officer ensures the consent is truly voluntary and not coerced, which is a critical legal and ethical standard under Nevada law and U.S. constitutional jurisprudence. This method maximizes the likelihood of legally obtaining evidence while upholding public trust and constitutional principles. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer implying that a search is mandatory or that refusal would be viewed negatively, even without explicitly stating it. This creates a coercive atmosphere, rendering any subsequent consent involuntary and therefore invalid. This violates the principle of voluntary consent, which is a cornerstone of lawful searches without a warrant. Legally, consent obtained under duress or the impression of obligation is not considered valid. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to proceed with a search without any legal justification, such as probable cause or voluntary consent, simply because they have a hunch or suspicion. This is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment and Nevada law, which requires a lawful basis for a search. Such an action would constitute an unlawful search and seizure, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence found and disciplinary action against the officer. A further incorrect approach is for the officer to detain the individual for an extended period without developing probable cause or obtaining consent, hoping that the individual will eventually consent to a search out of frustration or fatigue. Prolonged detention without sufficient legal grounds can escalate into an unlawful seizure, infringing upon the individual's liberty rights. This tactic is not only legally dubious, but also erodes community relations and trust in law enforcement. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves understanding the nuances of probable cause, reasonable suspicion, and the requirements for obtaining voluntary consent. When encountering situations requiring a search, officers should first assess if they have the necessary legal grounds. If probable cause exists, they should seek a warrant. If a warrant is not feasible or applicable and consent is desired, officers must clearly communicate the individual's right to refuse consent and ensure any consent given is demonstrably voluntary. Documentation of the interaction, including the individual's understanding of their rights and the voluntary nature of their consent, is crucial for accountability and legal defensibility. Question 2. When evaluating a situation where an LVMPD officer observes an individual discarding an item into a public trash receptacle shortly after witnessing a reported crime in the vicinity, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold both investigative integrity and constitutional rights within Nevada? Option A. Immediately detain the individual and demand they retrieve the discarded item from the trash receptacle for inspection. Option B. Secure the immediate area around the trash receptacle to preserve potential evidence, then approach the individual to lawfully inquire about their actions and the discarded item while respecting their rights. Option C. Ignore the individual and the discarded item, focusing solely on other aspects of the reported crime. Option D. Proceed to search the trash receptacle without any interaction with the individual or securing the area. The correct answer is B. Secure the immediate area around the trash receptacle to preserve potential evidence, then approach the individual to lawfully inquire about their actions and the discarded item while respecting their rights. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual and the integrity of a potential investigation. The officer must act swiftly but also ethically and legally. The best approach involves prioritizing the preservation of evidence and the safety of all parties involved while respecting the individual's rights. This means securing the scene, ensuring no one contaminates potential evidence, and then initiating a lawful interaction with the individual. This aligns with the Nevada Revised Statutes concerning search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and LVMPD departmental policies that emphasize lawful investigative procedures and the protection of individual liberties. The officer's duty is to gather information through legal means, which includes establishing probable cause or reasonable suspicion for any detention or search, and respecting the right to remain silent and the right to counsel if applicable. An incorrect approach would be to immediately detain the individual and demand information without establishing a legal basis for such an action. This could violate the individual's rights against unreasonable search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment and Nevada law, potentially rendering any subsequently obtained evidence inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and focus solely on the observed evidence without attempting any lawful interaction. This misses a critical opportunity to gather information directly from a potential witness or suspect, which could be vital to the investigation and may be lost if the individual leaves the scene. Furthermore, failing to secure the scene properly before interacting with the individual risks the destruction or contamination of crucial evidence, undermining the investigative process and potentially hindering the pursuit of justice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat and scene safety. This is followed by identifying the legal basis for any interaction or action, considering constitutional rights and relevant statutes. Documentation of observations and actions is paramount. If a legal basis for detention or search exists, it must be articulated and followed. If not, the interaction should be limited to consensual encounters or observation, with a focus on preserving the scene for further investigation. Question 3. The analysis reveals that Officer Miller, while on patrol in Las Vegas, Nevada, observes a brief, seemingly innocuous interaction between a known individual with a history of minor offenses and another person in a parked vehicle. A concerned citizen approaches Officer Miller immediately after, expressing suspicion about the interaction and requesting immediate information about the individuals involved and the nature of their exchange. Considering the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's LVMPD operational framework and ethical guidelines, which of the following represents the most appropriate and professional course of action for Officer Miller? Option A. Engage in a detailed conversation with the citizen, sharing personal opinions on the observed behavior and speculating about potential criminal activity, while assuring them that the officer will personally investigate the matter further. Option B. Politely acknowledge the citizen's concern, inform them that the matter is being noted, and proceed to document the observation and the citizen's report according to departmental procedures, without disclosing specific details about the individuals or the interaction until an official assessment is made. Option C. Advise the citizen that their observation is not a priority and that the department cannot act on mere suspicions. Then continue with their patrol without further documentation. Option D. Immediately provide the citizen with the names of the individuals involved and a speculative explanation of what might have been occurring, based on the citizen's description and the officer's prior knowledge. The correct answer is B. Politely acknowledge the citizen's concern, inform them that the matter is being noted, and proceed to document the observation and the citizen's report according to departmental procedures, without disclosing specific details about the individuals or the interaction until an official assessment is made. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between maintaining public trust and ensuring the efficient execution of law enforcement duties. Officer Miller's immediate actions, while driven by a desire to resolve the situation quickly, must be weighed against the established protocols and ethical considerations governing interactions with the public and the handling of sensitive information. The need for swift action must not compromise the integrity of the investigation or the rights of the individuals involved. The best approach involves prioritizing adherence to departmental policy and legal mandates regarding evidence handling and public interaction. This means securing the scene, identifying all parties involved, and initiating the proper reporting procedures without prematurely disclosing information or making assumptions about guilt. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's LVMPD Standard Operating Procedures (SOP) concerning evidence integrity, witness interviews, and the prohibition of unauthorized disclosure of information. Specifically, LVMPD SOPs emphasize the importance of documenting all interactions accurately and maintaining a chain of custody for any potential evidence, while also protecting the privacy and rights of individuals until a formal investigation concludes. This methodical process ensures accountability, prevents contamination of evidence, and upholds the department's commitment to fairness and due process. An incorrect approach would be to immediately release the details of the observed interaction to the concerned citizen without proper verification or departmental authorization. This fails to uphold the principle of due process and could lead to the premature judgment of individuals, potentially damaging reputations and compromising any ongoing investigation. It also violates departmental guidelines on information dissemination, which typically require official channels for releasing information to the public. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the citizen's concerns outright and refuse to document the interaction or the observed behavior. This demonstrates a lack of professionalism and a disregard for community engagement, which is a vital component of effective policing. It also neglects the potential for the citizen's observation to be a crucial piece of information, however minor it may seem at the time, and fails to follow the mandate to document all significant public interactions. A further incorrect approach would be to engage in a lengthy, informal discussion with the citizen about the specifics of the observed behavior, offering personal opinions or speculation. This blurs the lines between professional duty and personal commentary, potentially compromising the officer's objectivity and the integrity of any future investigation. It also risks disclosing information that may not be officially confirmed or relevant to the broader context of the situation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of departmental policies and legal frameworks. Officers should be trained to assess situations, identify potential risks and responsibilities, and then act in a manner that is both effective and ethically sound. This includes a commitment to documentation, impartiality, and the protection of individual rights, while also fostering positive community relations through transparent and professional conduct within established guidelines. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that during a routine traffic stop on a Las Vegas street, an LVMPD officer discovered a small bag of suspected narcotics in plain view on the passenger seat of the vehicle. The officer, concerned about the immediate safety of the scene and the potential for the evidence to be further compromised due to ongoing traffic, needs to decide on the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure the integrity of the evidence in accordance with Nevada law. Option A. Dispose of the suspected narcotics in a nearby public trash receptacle to clear the scene quickly. Option B. Hand the suspected narcotics to the driver of the vehicle to dispose of them responsibly. Option C. Immediately secure the suspected narcotics, photograph them in their original location, and then transport them directly to the LVMPD evidence locker for proper logging and storage. Option D. Place the suspected narcotics in the patrol vehicle's trunk for later processing at the station. Correct answer is C. Immediately secure the suspected narcotics, photograph them in their original location, and then transport them directly to the LVMPD evidence locker for proper logging and storage. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to Nevada Revised Statutes, NRS, concerning the proper handling of evidence and the chain of custody. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an officer to balance immediate operational needs with the long-term integrity of potential legal proceedings. Failure to meticulously document and secure evidence can lead to its inadmissibility in court, jeopardizing investigations and undermining public trust in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD. The best approach involves immediately securing the found narcotics and initiating the formal evidence logging process as per LVMPD policy, which is designed to comply with NRS requirements for evidence handling and chain of custody. This includes photographing the evidence in situ, documenting the exact location and circumstances of discovery, and ensuring it is properly sealed and transported to the evidence locker by authorized personnel. This meticulous documentation and adherence to protocol are critical for maintaining the integrity of the evidence, ensuring its admissibility in court, and upholding the principles of due process as mandated by Nevada law. An incorrect approach would be to store the narcotics in the patrol vehicle's trunk for later processing. This action creates a significant risk of compromising the chain of custody. The trunk of a patrol vehicle is not a secure, climate-controlled evidence storage facility, and items stored there are susceptible to tampering, contamination, or accidental loss. This directly violates the spirit and letter of NRS regarding evidence integrity and would likely render the narcotics inadmissible in court. Another incorrect approach is to immediately dispose of the narcotics without proper documentation or authorization. This constitutes destruction of evidence, a serious offense that undermines the judicial process and violates NRS provisions for evidence preservation. It bypasses all accountability measures and prevents any subsequent analysis or use of the evidence in an investigation or prosecution. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to hand the narcotics directly to a civilian informant for disposal. This is highly irregular and introduces an unacceptable level of risk. Informants are not authorized personnel for evidence handling, and their involvement creates a severe break in the chain of custody, making the evidence unreliable and inadmissible. It also exposes the department to potential allegations of misconduct or evidence tampering. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established legal and departmental protocols for evidence handling. This involves recognizing the critical importance of the chain of custody, understanding the specific requirements of NRS, and consistently applying LVMPD policies to ensure the integrity and admissibility of all evidence. When in doubt, officers should consult with supervisors or the evidence custodian to ensure proper procedures are followed. Question 5. Implementation of community policing principles by an LVMPD officer encountering an individual exhibiting erratic behavior in a public park requires a nuanced approach. Considering the diverse needs of the Las Vegas community, which of the following actions best reflects the LVMPD commitment to serving and protecting all residents while upholding the law? Option A. Approach the individual calmly. Attempt to engage in conversation to understand their situation, and offer assistance by connecting them with relevant social services or mental health resources if appropriate, before considering any enforcement action. Option B. Ignore the individual's behavior, assuming it is not a direct threat and therefore not the officer's concern. Option C. Confront the individual aggressively, demanding immediate compliance and questioning them intensely to ascertain their intentions. Option D. Immediately issue a citation for loitering or disturbing the peace, regardless of the individual's circumstances, to maintain public order. The correct answer is A. Approach the individual calmly, attempt to engage in conversation to understand their situation, and offer assistance by connecting them with relevant social services or mental health resources if appropriate, before considering any enforcement action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an LVMPD officer due to the inherent tension between community relations and the enforcement of laws, particularly when dealing with potentially vulnerable individuals. The officer must balance the immediate need for public safety and order with the long-term impact of their actions on community trust and the perception of the LVMPD. Misjudgments can lead to accusations of profiling, excessive force, or a failure to uphold constitutional rights, all of which can erode public confidence and hinder future law enforcement efforts. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both legally sound and ethically defensible, reflecting the LVMPD commitment to serving and protecting all members of the Las Vegas community. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves de-escalating the situation through calm, clear communication, and a focus on understanding the individual's immediate needs and potential underlying issues. This approach prioritizes establishing rapport and offering assistance, such as connecting the individual with social services or mental health resources if appropriate, before resorting to enforcement actions. This aligns with modern policing philosophies that emphasize community policing, problem solving, and a guardian mindset, as outlined in LVMPD general orders and training on de-escalation and crisis intervention. The ethical justification lies in treating individuals with dignity and respect, recognizing that not all public disturbances stem from criminal intent, and that a compassionate response can be more effective in resolving the situation and preventing future incidents. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately issuing a citation or making an arrest without attempting to understand the situation or offer alternative solutions. This fails to consider the potential for underlying issues, such as homelessness, mental health crises, or substance abuse, which may be better addressed through social services rather than punitive measures. This approach can be perceived as heavy-handed and may alienate the individual and the broader community, undermining the LVMPD role as a community partner. It also risks escalating a non-criminal issue into a more serious confrontation. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, assuming it is not the officer's responsibility. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty to protect and serve the public. While the individual may not be actively committing a crime, their behavior could indicate a need for assistance or pose a potential risk to themselves or others. Ignoring such situations can lead to negative outcomes and reflects poorly on the department's commitment to public safety and welfare. A third incorrect approach is to engage in overly aggressive questioning or intimidation tactics to elicit a confession or compliance. This can be construed as harassment or a violation of the individual's rights, even if no formal arrest is made. Such behavior erodes trust and can create a hostile environment, making future interactions more difficult and potentially leading to formal complaints against the officer and the department. It also fails to address the root cause of the behavior. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, prioritizing de-escalation and communication. This involves actively listening, observing nonverbal cues, and seeking to understand the individual's perspective and needs. If the situation does not immediately present a clear and present danger or a violation of law, officers should explore all available resources, including social services, mental health professionals, and community outreach programs, to provide appropriate assistance. Enforcement should be a last resort, employed only when necessary, and in a manner that is proportionate to the offense and consistent with legal and ethical standards. This approach fosters a more effective and humane form of law enforcement that builds trust and strengthens the relationship between the LVMPD and the community it serves. Question 6. To address the challenge of maintaining public trust and ensuring effective law enforcement, an LVMPD officer discovers a potentially significant piece of evidence at a crime scene while speaking with a concerned citizen who is also a witness. The citizen is eager for immediate information about the evidence and its implications. Which of the following actions best upholds the professional standards and legal obligations of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in this scenario? Option A. Advise the citizen that they can take possession of the evidence for safekeeping until the investigation progresses. Option B. Immediately inform the citizen about the nature and potential significance of the evidence, as the citizen is a witness and appears trustworthy. Option C. Secure the evidence, meticulously document its discovery and chain of custody, and inform the citizen that information regarding the evidence will be provided through official channels at the appropriate time, following consultation with supervisors. Option D. Briefly acknowledge the citizen's concern but proceed to process the evidence without providing any specific details or further communication regarding its status. The correct answer is C. Secure the evidence, meticulously document its discovery and chain of custody, and inform the citizen that information regarding the evidence will be provided through official channels at the appropriate time, following consultation with supervisors. Explanation: to address the challenge of maintaining public trust and ensuring effective law enforcement, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, must navigate complex situations involving community relations and the application of departmental policy. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an officer to balance the immediate need for information with the established protocols for handling sensitive evidence and maintaining the integrity of an investigation. A hasty or unauthorized disclosure could compromise the investigation, violate privacy rights, and erode public confidence in the LVMPD commitment to due process and evidence handling. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with Nevada revised statutes, NRS, and LVMPD policy. The best approach involves adhering strictly to established departmental procedures for evidence handling and information dissemination. This means securing the evidence, documenting its discovery and chain of custody meticulously, and only releasing information through authorized channels and at the appropriate stage of the investigation, typically after consultation with supervisors and potentially the district attorney's office. This method upholds the integrity of the investigation, protects the rights of individuals involved, and ensures compliance with NRS regarding evidence and privacy. It demonstrates a commitment to professional standards and the rule of law. An approach that involves immediately sharing details of the discovered evidence with the concerned citizen, even with good intention, is professionally unacceptable. This action bypasses established protocols for evidence management and investigation updates, potentially jeopardizing the investigation by alerting suspects or compromising the chain of custody. It also risks violating privacy rights and could lead to premature public disclosure of sensitive information before it has been properly vetted and authorized for release. Furthermore, it undermines the authority of supervisors and the investigative process. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the citizen's concerns without proper investigation or documentation, or to suggest the citizen take possession of the evidence themselves. This demonstrates a dereliction of duty and a failure to follow proper procedure for handling potential evidence. It could lead to the loss or contamination of crucial evidence, hindering the investigation and potentially allowing a perpetrator to evade justice. It also fails to uphold the LVMPD responsibility to secure and process evidence according to legal standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to policy and law, followed by consultation with supervisors. When faced with a situation involving potential evidence and a concerned citizen, an officer should first secure the scene and any potential evidence. Next, they should document the discovery and the interaction with the citizen. Then, they should consult with their supervisor to determine the appropriate next steps for evidence processing and communication with the citizen, ensuring all actions are in line with LVMPD policy and NRS. This systematic approach ensures accountability, integrity, and effective law enforcement. Question 7. Examination of the data shows that an LVMPD officer has initiated a lawful traffic stop in Las Vegas, Nevada, for a clear violation of a traffic law. During the stop, the officer observes the driver exhibiting nervous behavior. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take regarding further inquiry? Option A. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the driver's nervous behavior. Option B. Immediately begin questioning the driver about potential drug smuggling activities, given their nervous demeanor. Option C. Continue with the standard procedures for the traffic violation, and if reasonable suspicion of other criminal activity develops during this lawful interaction, then expand questioning. Option D. Detain the driver for an extended period to await the arrival of a K-9 unit for a sniff search of the vehicle. The correct answer is C. Continue with the standard procedures for the traffic violation, and if reasonable suspicion of other criminal activity develops during this lawful interaction, then expand questioning. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must make a rapid assessment of the situation, considering the potential for danger, the legality of the stop, and the permissible scope of questioning, without escalating the encounter unnecessarily or violating established legal precedent. The officer's actions directly impact the individual's rights and the integrity of any subsequent investigation or prosecution. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer first confirming the lawful basis for the traffic stop, and then proceeding with standard procedures related to traffic enforcement. If during this lawful interaction, the officer develops reasonable suspicion of criminal activity beyond the initial traffic violation, they may then expand their questioning. This approach is correct because it adheres to the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the principles established in landmark Supreme Court cases like Terry v. Ohio, which permit brief investigatory detentions and questioning based on reasonable suspicion. By prioritizing the lawful basis of the stop and only expanding inquiry upon developing reasonable suspicion, the officer respects the individual's rights while maintaining officer safety and investigative integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately questioning the driver about unrelated criminal activity without any articulable suspicion beyond the initial traffic infraction. This violates the Fourth Amendment by exceeding the scope of the lawful stop without sufficient justification, potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence obtained as a result. Another incorrect approach is to detain the driver for an extended period solely to wait for a K-9 unit to arrive, without any independent reasonable suspicion of drug-related activity. This constitutes an unreasonable seizure under the Fourth Amendment, as the duration and nature of the detention are not reasonably related to the initial traffic violation or any developing suspicion. A further incorrect approach is to conduct a search of the vehicle without probable cause or consent, based merely on a hunch or the driver's demeanor. This is a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to interactions. First, establish the lawful basis for any stop or detention. Second, conduct the investigation or enforcement related to that lawful basis. Third, if reasonable suspicion of further criminal activity develops during the lawful interaction, then and only then, expand the scope of questioning or investigation, always mindful of the duration and intrusiveness of the encounter. This systematic process ensures adherence to legal standards and ethical obligations. Question 8. Research into Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, protocols indicates that officers often encounter situations requiring immediate action. If an LVMPD officer develops a strong suspicion, based on credible but uncorroborated information from a confidential informant, that illegal narcotics are being stored in a private residence within Clark County, Nevada, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action to initiate a search of that residence? Option A. Conduct an immediate search of the residence based on the officer's suspicion and the informant's tip, believing it is necessary to prevent the destruction of evidence. Option B. Attempt to gain entry to the residence and search without a warrant, relying on the belief that the public interest in combating drug trafficking outweighs individual privacy rights in this instance. Option C. Seek a search warrant from a judge by presenting the confidential informant's information, along with any other corroborating evidence gathered, to establish probable cause. Option D. Approach a neighbor and ask for their permission to search the residence, assuming they have knowledge of the activities within. The correct answer is C. Seek a search warrant from a judge by presenting the confidential informant's information, along with any other corroborating evidence gathered, to establish probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the immediate need for information with the rights and privacy of individuals. An LVMPD officer must act within the strict confines of Nevada law and departmental policy regarding searches and seizures, ensuring that any actions taken are legally justified and ethically sound. Failure to do so can lead to legal repercussions, departmental sanctions, and a breach of public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause before conducting a search of private property. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted by Nevada courts, which protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures. Probable cause, supported by specific and articulable facts, is the legal standard required to justify the issuance of a warrant by a neutral and detached magistrate. This process ensures that law enforcement actions are not arbitrary and are based on a reasonable belief that evidence of a crime will be found. Incorrect approach is analysis. Conducting a search based solely on a hunch or a tip from an anonymous source without further corroboration is an ethical and legal failure. This violates the probable cause standard and the protections against unreasonable searches. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found, civil liability for the officer and the department, and disciplinary action. Entering the property and searching without any legal justification, even if the officer believes it is for the public good, is a direct violation of constitutional rights. This demonstrates a disregard for established legal procedures and the fundamental rights of citizens, leading to severe legal and professional consequences. Seeking consent from a person who is not the owner or lawful occupant of the property to conduct a search is also legally insufficient. Consent to search must be given by someone with actual or apparent authority over the property. Relying on consent from an unauthorized individual would render any subsequent search unlawful and any evidence inadmissible. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and constitutional protections. This involves a thorough understanding of probable cause, the warrant requirement, and the exceptions to the warrant rule. When faced with a situation requiring a search, an officer should meticulously gather facts, assess whether probable cause exists, and if so, pursue a warrant. If an exception to the warrant requirement is considered, the officer must be able to articulate specific, legally recognized grounds for that exception. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt is also a critical component of responsible decision-making. Question 9. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officer to take when encountering an individual exhibiting nervous behavior and repeatedly looking at their waistband in a high-crime area of Las Vegas, Nevada, while considering the legal standards for stops and frisks? Option A. Detain the individual and conduct a pat-down search of their outer clothing if there are specific, articulable facts suggesting they are armed and dangerous. Option B. Approach the individual and ask them to empty their pockets due to the general nervousness and location. Option C. Stop the individual and conduct a full search of their person based on the assumption that their behavior is indicative of criminal intent. Option D. Ignore the individual as their behavior does not definitively indicate criminal activity and avoid potential complaints. Correct answer is A. Detain the individual and conduct a pat-down search of their outer clothing if there are specific, articulable facts suggesting they are armed and dangerous. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Nevada, balancing the immediate need for public safety with the procedural rights of individuals encountered during an investigation. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, operates under Nevada state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. The professional challenge lies in discerning when an individual's behavior warrants a stop and frisk for officer safety versus when it constitutes a mere suspicion that does not justify a temporary detention and pat-down. Misjudging this threshold can lead to violations of civil liberties, internal affairs investigations, and damage to community trust. The approach that represents best professional practice involves officers relying on specific, articulable facts that, when taken together with rational inferences from those facts, reasonably warrant an intrusion into a citizen's personal security. This is rooted in the reasonable suspicion standard established in Terry v. Ohio and adopted by Nevada courts. An officer must be able to point to objective facts, not hunches or generalized suspicion, that suggest the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime, and that the person may be armed and presently dangerous. This approach prioritizes constitutional rights while allowing officers to take necessary precautions for their safety and the safety of the public. An approach that involves stopping and frisking an individual based solely on a generalized feeling of unease or a vague report without specific, observable behaviors is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the reasonable suspicion standard and infringes upon the individual's Fourth Amendment rights. Such an action could be deemed an unlawful stop and frisk, leading to evidence suppression in criminal proceedings and potential civil liability for the officer and the department. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore potentially dangerous indicators because of a reluctance to engage with the public. While officers must be mindful of constitutional rights, a failure to investigate suspicious behavior that poses a clear threat to public safety, when supported by articulable facts, could be considered dereliction of duty. This approach neglects the officer's responsibility to maintain order and prevent crime. Finally, an approach that relies on the individual's race or ethnicity as a primary factor for suspicion is discriminatory and illegal. Law enforcement actions must be based on individual behavior and objective facts, not on stereotypes or group affiliations. This violates both Nevada law and federal civil rights statutes, leading to severe disciplinary action and undermining the LVMPD commitment to equitable policing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the observed facts against established legal standards. Officers should ask themselves, what specific, observable behaviors are present? Do these behaviors, when viewed objectively, suggest criminal activity? Is there a reasonable basis to believe this individual is armed and poses a danger? If the answers to these questions are affirmative and supported by articulable facts, then a stop and frisk may be justified. If not, officers should continue to observe or disengage, respecting the individual's rights. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, has an allocated overtime budget of $150,000 for the upcoming fiscal quarter. The standard overtime hourly rate for officers is $75 per hour. If the department aims to utilize the entire overtime budget to maximize patrol coverage during peak demand periods, what is the maximum number of overtime hours that can be funded for the quarter? Option A, 2,000 hours. Option B, 1,500 hours. Option C, 1,875 hours. Option D, 2,500 hours. The correct answer is A, 2,000 hours. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Nevada, managing limited resources during a period of increased demand. The need to allocate overtime hours effectively, while ensuring adequate patrol coverage and responding to calls for service, requires careful financial planning and adherence to departmental policies. The officer must balance operational needs with budgetary constraints, a task that demands analytical skills and a thorough understanding of departmental financial procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a direct calculation of the total overtime hours available within the allocated budget, and then distributing those hours based on a data-driven assessment of patrol needs. This method ensures that overtime expenditure remains within the approved financial limits, while prioritizing areas with the highest call volume or greatest need for presence. This aligns with sound fiscal management principles and the LVMPD responsibility to utilize taxpayer funds efficiently. Specifically, calculating the total available overtime budget and dividing it by the hourly overtime rate provides the maximum allowable overtime hours. This figure then guides the allocation process, ensuring that no expenditure exceeds the budget. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply approve overtime requests as they are submitted without considering the overall budget. This could lead to exceeding the allocated overtime funds, creating a deficit that requires difficult budget adjustments or potentially impacts other departmental services. It fails to demonstrate fiscal responsibility and adherence to budgetary controls. Another incorrect approach is to arbitrarily cap overtime hours for all officers without considering the varying demands of different patrol areas or shifts. This could result in understaffing in high-demand areas, potentially compromising public safety and the department's ability to respond effectively to incidents. It lacks a data-driven basis for resource allocation. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize overtime for officers based on seniority or personal relationships rather than operational need. This is ethically unsound and undermines the principle of merit-based resource allocation. It can lead to inefficient deployment of resources and create perceptions of favoritism, damaging morale and trust within the department. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach resource allocation challenges by first understanding the total available budget. They should then use data, such as call volume, crime statistics, and response times, to identify areas of greatest need. Calculations should be performed to determine how many hours of overtime can be funded within the budget. Finally, overtime should be allocated based on these data-driven needs, ensuring both fiscal responsibility and effective operational coverage. Question 11. Process analysis reveals that a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, officer encounters an individual exhibiting signs of distress and disorientation in a public park, speaking incoherently and appearing to be under the influence of an unknown substance. The individual is not posing an immediate threat to others, but is clearly unable to care for themselves. Considering Nevada revised statutes and LVMPD protocols, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and professional response? Option A. Advise the individual to leave the park and return home, then continue patrol without further intervention. Option B. Assess the individual for immediate medical or mental health needs, attempt de-escalation, and if available and appropriate, contact a crisis intervention team, SIT, for specialized assistance, while considering legal statutes for public intoxication and disorderly conduct only if other interventions are unsuccessful or the situation escalates. Option C. Engage in aggressive questioning to ascertain the cause of their behavior and demand they sober up immediately. Option D. Immediately arrest the individual for public intoxication and disorderly conduct under Nevada revised statutes, as their behavior clearly indicates a violation. The correct answer is B. Assess the individual for immediate medical or mental health needs, attempt de-escalation, and if available and appropriate, contact a crisis intervention team, SIT, for specialized assistance, while considering legal statutes for public intoxication and disorderly conduct only if other interventions are unsuccessful or the situation escalates. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an LVMPD officer by requiring them to navigate a situation involving a potential violation of Nevada state law concerning public intoxication and disorderly conduct, while also considering the immediate safety of the individual and the public. The officer must balance enforcement duties with the need for compassionate and effective intervention, especially when the individual appears to be experiencing a mental health crisis. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the situation, determining the most appropriate course of action under Nevada revised statutes, NRS, Chapter 207, Offenses Against Public Order, and ensuring that the individual receives the necessary assistance without unnecessary escalation or violation of their rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing the individual's immediate well-being and safety while adhering to Nevada law. This approach involves assessing the individual for signs of medical distress or a mental health crisis, contacting appropriate specialized units such as a crisis intervention team, SIT, if available and warranted, and providing de-escalation techniques. If the individual's behavior constitutes a clear and present danger to themselves or others, or a direct violation of NRS 207, 250, disorderly conduct, or NRS 207, 265, public intoxication, the officer would then consider arrest or citation. However, the initial focus is on a welfare check and connecting the individual with resources that can address the underlying issues, which aligns with modern policing principles and the LVMPD commitment to community-oriented policing and mental health response. This approach is ethically sound, as it seeks to provide aid and prevent further harm, and legally compliant by addressing potential violations while exploring less punitive interventions first. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately arresting the individual for public intoxication and disorderly conduct without a thorough assessment of their condition. This fails to consider the possibility of an underlying medical emergency or mental health crisis, which could be exacerbated by an arrest. It also bypasses the opportunity to connect the individual with mental health services, potentially leading to a cycle of repeated encounters with law enforcement and the justice system without addressing the root cause. This approach may violate the spirit of community policing and could be seen as an overreach of authority if the individual's actions are primarily a manifestation of a health issue rather than malicious intent. Another incorrect approach is to simply leave the individual without taking any action, assuming they will resolve their situation independently. This is negligent and fails to uphold the officer's duty to protect and serve the public, including vulnerable individuals. The individual's behavior, even if not immediately dangerous, could escalate or pose a risk to themselves or others if left unattended. This approach neglects the potential for a mental health crisis or other underlying issues that require intervention. A further incorrect approach is to engage in aggressive questioning or confrontation without attempting de-escalation or assessing the individual's state. This could escalate the situation unnecessarily, potentially leading to resistance or further disorderly conduct, and may not accurately capture the individual's needs or the circumstances of their behavior. It prioritizes an adversarial interaction over a supportive one, which is counterproductive when dealing with individuals who may be experiencing distress. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to decision-making in such situations. First, conduct a thorough assessment of the individual's immediate safety and well-being, considering medical and mental health factors. Second, attempt de-escalation and communication to understand the situation. Third, consult available resources, such as CIT officers or mental health liaisons, if the assessment indicates a need. Fourth, determine the most appropriate legal and ethical course of action, which may include providing assistance, referral to services, or, as a last resort, enforcement action if warranted by clear violations of Nevada law and a threat to public safety. This framework emphasizes problem-solving and community well-being alongside law enforcement duties. Question 12. During a lawful traffic stop in Las Vegas, Nevada, an LVMPD officer observes an odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The driver appears nervous. The officer asks the driver if they can search the vehicle. The driver hesitates and asks, "Do I have to let you?" What is the most appropriate course of action for the LVMPD officer? Option A. Proceed with the search, explaining that the odor of marijuana provides probable cause for a search under Nevada law. Option B. Detain the driver for an extended period to further investigate the odor and observe the driver's behavior for signs of impairment before asking for consent to search. Option C. Clearly inform the driver that they do not have to consent to the search and that they are free to refuse, then proceed with the search only if voluntary consent is explicitly given. Option D. Conduct a pat-down search of the driver's person based on the nervousness and the odor, and if nothing is found, then proceed to search the vehicle. The correct answer is C. Clearly inform the driver that they do not have to consent to the search and that they are free to refuse, then proceed with the search only if voluntary consent is explicitly given. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a roadside stop. The officer must make a rapid judgment call that could impact the investigation, the individual's rights, and the integrity of evidence. The potential for misinterpretation or overreach necessitates a thorough understanding of Nevada law and departmental policy regarding investigatory stops and consent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly informing the individual of their right to refuse consent to a search, and then proceeding only if voluntary consent is given. This approach respects the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, as protected by Nevada law. By explicitly stating that the individual does not have to consent, and that they are free to leave if not detained, the officer establishes a clear record of voluntary cooperation, mitigating the risk of a subsequent legal challenge based on coercion or unlawful detention. This aligns with the principles of lawful investigatory stops and the requirement for voluntary consent in Nevada. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with a search after the individual has expressed hesitation or uncertainty about their willingness to consent, without clearly reiterating their right to refuse. This can be construed as implied coercion, undermining the voluntariness of the consent. Nevada law requires consent to be freely and voluntarily given, and hesitation can indicate a lack of true willingness. Another incorrect approach is to search the vehicle based on a generalized suspicion or a hunch without articulable facts that would justify a search under Nevada's exceptions to the warrant requirement, such as probable cause or reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. Relying solely on a feeling, rather than specific observations or information, violates the legal standards for stops and searches in Nevada and could lead to the suppression of any evidence found. A further incorrect approach is to detain the individual beyond the scope of the initial lawful stop for the purpose of obtaining consent to search, without developing new reasonable suspicion or probable cause during the stop. This prolongs the detention unlawfully and can taint any consent obtained thereafter, making it inadmissible in court. Professional reasoning. When encountering such a situation, an LVMPD officer should first ensure the initial stop is lawful and based on reasonable suspicion. If the officer wishes to search the vehicle, they must articulate specific facts supporting probable cause or obtain voluntary consent. When seeking consent, the officer must clearly inform the individual that they are not obligated to consent and are free to refuse. The officer should document this interaction meticulously, noting the individual's demeanor and response. If consent is not freely given, the officer must rely on established legal exceptions to the warrant requirement or conclude the search. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during a routine traffic stop in Las Vegas, Nevada, an officer observes suspicious behavior from the driver and has reason to believe the driver may be involved in a recent series of burglaries. The officer needs to ascertain the driver's whereabouts and activities. Which of the following actions best adheres to the legal and ethical standards expected of an LVMPD officer? Option A. Pressure the driver to answer questions by suggesting that non-cooperation will lead to more severe legal consequences. Option B. Inform the driver of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions related to their activities or destination. Option C. Detain the driver for an extended period to conduct a comprehensive background check and search the vehicle for evidence of burglaries. Option D. Immediately begin questioning the driver about their recent activities and where they have been without advising them of their rights. The correct answer is B. Inform the driver of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions related to their activities or destination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the constitutional rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must make a rapid judgment call on how to proceed without infringing upon the suspect's rights, which could lead to evidence being inadmissible or disciplinary action if handled improperly. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department operates under Nevada state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment concerning unreasonable searches and seizures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly informing the individual of their right to remain silent and their right to an attorney before asking any questions that could elicit an incriminating response. This aligns with the Miranda v. Arizona ruling, which mandates that custodial interrogations must be preceded by advisement of these rights. By doing so, the officer respects the individual's constitutional protections while still attempting to gather information in a legally sound manner. This approach ensures that any statements made by the individual are admissible in court and upholds the department's commitment to lawful policing. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately begin questioning the individual about their activities and destination without any advisement of rights. This directly violates the Miranda warning requirement for custodial interrogations and could lead to any obtained statements being suppressed as evidence. It demonstrates a disregard for constitutional protections. Another incorrect approach is to detain the individual for an extended period to conduct a thorough background check and search the vehicle without probable cause or reasonable suspicion beyond the initial traffic violation. While officers have certain investigative powers during a stop, prolonged detention or searches without proper legal justification constitute unlawful seizure and search, violating Fourth Amendment rights and departmental policy. A third incorrect approach is to coerce or pressure the individual into answering questions by implying negative consequences if they do not cooperate. This is ethically unsound and legally impermissible, as it undermines the voluntary nature of any statements and can be construed as an interrogation tactic that bypasses Miranda protections. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves a clear understanding of when Miranda warnings are required, the scope of authority during a traffic stop, and the importance of obtaining voluntary statements. Officers should always err on the side of caution when it comes to individual rights and consult legal guidance or supervisors when in doubt about the legality of their actions. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a proactive, high-visibility enforcement operation in a Las Vegas neighborhood experiencing a general increase in noise complaints could potentially deter future disturbances. However, the LVMPD officer on duty must decide on the most prudent course of action. Which approach best balances public safety, resource allocation, and community relations? Option A. Immediately initiate a high-visibility enforcement operation with multiple patrol units to address the general complaint and create a deterrent effect. Option B. Deploy a large contingent of officers to conduct a sweep of the area, focusing on issuing citations for any minor infractions observed. Option C. Assess the immediate threat level and explore de-escalation or community engagement strategies before committing significant resources to a visible enforcement operation. Option D. Prioritize responding to the noise complaints with a show of force to quickly establish authority and discourage further disturbances. The correct answer is C. Assess the immediate threat level and explore de-escalation or community engagement strategies before committing significant resources to a visible enforcement operation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for public safety with the potential for unintended negative consequences on community relations and the efficient allocation of departmental resources. The decision involves weighing the perceived benefit of a visible enforcement action against the cost in terms of officer time, potential for escalation, and the impact on public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions are both lawful and strategically sound for the long-term effectiveness of the department. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the immediate threat and available resources before initiating a high-visibility enforcement action. This means considering whether the observed behavior constitutes an immediate danger to public safety, if less intrusive methods are available, and if the deployment of significant resources is proportionate to the risk. This approach aligns with the LVMPD commitment to community policing principles, which emphasize building trust and working collaboratively with residents. It also reflects a responsible use of taxpayer-funded resources, ensuring that enforcement actions are targeted and effective rather than merely reactive or performative. The Nevada revised statutes, particularly those pertaining to public order and officer discretion, empower officers to act when necessary, but also imply a duty to exercise sound judgment in resource allocation and the application of enforcement measures. Ethical considerations of fairness and proportionality are paramount. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a high-visibility enforcement action solely based on a general complaint without a clear, immediate threat to public safety is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks alienating the community, creating an impression of over-policing, and diverting resources from more critical issues. It fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and can erode public trust, which is essential for effective law enforcement. Deploying a large contingent of officers to conduct a sweep of the area without a specific intelligence-led justification or a clear, imminent threat is also professionally unsound. This represents a significant misallocation of resources that could be better utilized for proactive community engagement, crime prevention initiatives, or responding to more pressing calls for service. It prioritizes a show of force over strategic effectiveness and community partnership, focusing exclusively on issuing citations for minor infractions without considering the broader context or potential for de-escalation, demonstrates a lack of nuanced judgment. While citations are a tool, their indiscriminate use in this scenario could be perceived as punitive rather than problem-solving, potentially exacerbating tensions and failing to address any underlying issues contributing to the complaint. This approach neglects the broader mandate of community safety and well-being. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a tiered approach to enforcement. This begins with assessing the severity and immediacy of the threat. If the threat is low or non-existent, de-escalation, community engagement, or alternative problem-solving strategies should be considered first. If enforcement is deemed necessary, the response should be proportionate to the threat, utilizing the minimum level of force and resources required to achieve a safe and lawful outcome. Continuous evaluation of the situation and the impact of actions on community relations should guide ongoing decision-making. Question 15. Strategic planning requires LVMPD officers to anticipate and respond effectively to dynamic situations. If an officer observes an individual in a high-crime area exhibiting furtive movements and a visible bulge in their waistband, consistent with a firearm, and the individual attempts to evade the officer's presence. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure both public safety and adherence to legal standards in Las Vegas, Nevada? Option A. Ignore the observed bulge and evasive behavior to avoid escalating the situation and allow the individual to depart without further interaction. Option B. Rely on a general suspicion that individuals in high-crime areas are more likely to be involved in criminal activity and conduct an immediate search of the individual. Option C. Conduct a lawful Terry stop based on reasonable suspicion. Articulate the specific observations supporting the stop and the subsequent pat-down for weapons based on probable cause derived from the observed bulge and evasive behavior, and meticulously document all findings and actions. Option D. Detain the individual solely based on the observed bulge, without articulating specific reasons for the stop or the immediate threat posed. The correct answer is C. Conduct a lawful Terry stop based on reasonable suspicion. Articulate the specific observations supporting the stop and the subsequent pat-down for weapons based on probable cause derived from the observed bulge and evasive behavior, and meticulously document all findings and actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for public safety and crime prevention with the fundamental rights of individuals and the established legal procedures. The officer must make a rapid judgment call under pressure, considering the potential consequences of both action and inaction, while adhering strictly to Nevada law and LVMPD policy. The presence of a potentially dangerous weapon, coupled with the suspect's evasive behavior, creates a high-stakes situation demanding careful consideration of probable cause and reasonable suspicion. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer meticulously documenting all observations and actions, focusing on the objective facts that led to the stop and subsequent search. This approach prioritizes gathering evidence that supports probable cause for the stop and the search, ensuring compliance with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Nevada revised statutes governing searches and seizures. By detailing the suspect's furtive movements, the visible bulge consistent with a weapon, and the suspect's attempt to evade, the officer establishes a clear and defensible basis for their actions, demonstrating that the stop and search were conducted within legal parameters. This thorough documentation is crucial for any subsequent legal proceedings and internal review, upholding the principles of due process and accountability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer relying solely on a gut feeling or a generalized suspicion about the individual's appearance or presence in the area. This fails to meet the legal standard of reasonable suspicion required for a Terry stop or probable cause for a search under Nevada law. Without articulable facts, such an action would be considered an unlawful stop and search, violating the suspect's constitutional rights and potentially leading to the suppression of any evidence found. Another incorrect approach is to immediately detain and search the individual without sufficient justification, even if a bulge is observed. While the bulge is a significant factor, the officer must articulate why that bulge, in conjunction with other observed behaviors, specifically suggests a weapon and poses an immediate threat. A search conducted without this specific articulation, or before a lawful stop is established, could be deemed an unreasonable search. A further incorrect approach would be to ignore the observed bulge and evasive behavior, choosing to let the individual leave without further investigation. While this might avoid a confrontation, it could also represent a failure to act on potentially critical information regarding a public safety threat, which could have serious consequences if the individual is later found to be armed and dangerous. This inaction, if it leads to harm, could be subject to departmental review for dereliction of duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective observation, legal standards, and departmental policy. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously assessing the environment and the behavior of individuals. 2. Articulable facts, identifying and documenting specific observable facts that support a legal justification for any action taken, e.g., reasonable suspicion for a stop, probable cause for a search. 3. Legal compliance, ensuring all actions align with the Fourth Amendment, Nevada revised statutes, and LVMPD policies. 4. Documentation, meticulously recording all observations, justifications, and actions taken. 5. Proportionality, ensuring the level of intrusion, stop, search, detention is proportionate to the observed threat or suspicion. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal a scenario where a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officer, responding to a routine traffic stop in Clark County, Nevada, detects a strong odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle's interior. The driver appears nervous and evasive. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to ensure both public safety and the integrity of potential evidence, in accordance with Nevada law and LVMPD policy? Option A. Conduct an immediate warrantless search of the vehicle based on the odor of marijuana, as this constitutes probable cause under Nevada law. Option B. Secure the scene and immediately request a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective to assist with a potential search and evidence collection. Option C. Confiscate any visible marijuana and issue a citation to the driver. Then allow the vehicle and occupants to leave the scene. Option D. Detain the driver and all passengers indefinitely until a supervisor arrives to make a decision on how to proceed. The correct answer is B. Secure the scene and immediately request a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective to assist with a potential search and evidence collection. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge faced by law enforcement officers in Nevada, balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement for thorough and lawful evidence collection. The professional challenge lies in the potential for a lapse in judgment under pressure to lead to the compromise of evidence, thereby jeopardizing a criminal prosecution and undermining public trust in the LVMPD. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions taken are consistent with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Nevada state law regarding searches and seizures. The best approach involves securing the scene and immediately requesting specialized units, such as a K-9 unit or a narcotics detective, who are trained and equipped for evidence detection and collection. This approach is correct because it prioritizes lawful procedure and the integrity of potential evidence. By securing the scene, officers prevent contamination or destruction of evidence. Requesting specialized units ensures that the search for contraband is conducted by personnel with the appropriate expertise, minimizing the risk of an unlawful search and maximizing the chances of legally admissible evidence. This aligns with the principles of due process and the exclusionary rule, which mandates that illegally obtained evidence cannot be used in court. Furthermore, adhering to established protocols for evidence handling, as outlined in LVMPD policy and Nevada revised statutes, is paramount for maintaining the chain of custody and ensuring the reliability of evidence. An incorrect approach would be to immediately search the vehicle without probable cause or a warrant, based solely on the smell of marijuana. While the smell of marijuana can contribute to probable cause, it does not automatically grant officers the right to conduct a warrantless search of a vehicle in all circumstances, especially given evolving Nevada laws regarding marijuana. This approach risks violating the Fourth Amendment by conducting an unreasonable search. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the occupants for an extended period without reasonable suspicion of further criminal activity beyond the initial observation, potentially leading to claims of unlawful detention. Finally, an approach that involves the informal disposal of any discovered contraband without proper documentation and evidence logging would be a severe ethical and regulatory failure, compromising the integrity of the investigation and potentially shielding a suspect from accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the totality of the circumstances. This involves identifying the legal basis for any proposed action, e.g., probable cause, reasonable suspicion, consent. They must then consider the relevant departmental policies and state laws governing searches, seizures, and evidence handling. If there is any uncertainty about the legality or proper procedure, the professional course of action is to consult with a supervisor or seek guidance from specialized units before proceeding. Prioritizing lawful conduct and evidence integrity ensures that the LVMPD upholds its commitment to justice and public safety. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that upon arriving at a reported burglary scene in Las Vegas, Nevada, an LVMPD officer observes a civilian who claims to have witnessed the entire event and has already begun to touch and move items within the immediate vicinity of the point of entry. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to uphold the integrity of the investigation and ensure compliance with Nevada law enforcement protocols? Option A. Politely ask the civilian to leave the scene entirely and not speak to anyone about what they saw until instructed by detectives. Option B. Allow the civilian witness to continue their examination and collection of items they deem important, as their cooperation is valuable. Option C. Immediately secure the perimeter of the scene to prevent further disturbance, and then request detectives and crime scene investigators to manage the scene and interview the witness. Option D. Focus all immediate attention on questioning the civilian about their own potential involvement in the incident, given their presence and actions. The correct answer is C. Immediately secure the perimeter of the scene to prevent further disturbance, and then request detectives and crime scene investigators to manage the scene and interview the witness. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an LVMPD officer due to the inherent tension between the immediate need to secure a scene and gather evidence, and the potential for civilian interference or the need for specialized expertise. The officer must balance their duty to investigate with the rights and safety of bystanders, as well as the integrity of the investigation itself. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are lawful, ethical, and contribute to a successful resolution. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the perimeter to prevent contamination or alteration of the scene, and then promptly requesting specialized units, such as detectives or crime scene investigators, to manage the evidence collection. This approach is correct because it adheres to the Nevada revised statutes concerning law enforcement procedures and evidence handling, which mandate the preservation of crime scenes. It also aligns with LVMPD departmental policies that outline the roles and responsibilities of officers in initial response and evidence management, emphasizing the importance of expert handling of sensitive areas. Ethically, this ensures that the investigation is conducted with the highest degree of professionalism and accuracy, respecting the rights of all involved and upholding the integrity of the justice system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves allowing the civilian witness to continue their detailed examination of the scene and collect their own evidence before official investigators arrive. This is professionally unacceptable because it risks contaminating or destroying crucial evidence, potentially compromising the entire investigation. It violates the principle of maintaining the chain of custody for evidence, as mandated by Nevada law, and could lead to inadmissible evidence in court. Another incorrect approach is to immediately dismiss the civilian witness and prevent them from providing any information without first attempting to obtain a preliminary statement. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to recognize the potential value of eyewitness testimony, which is often critical in criminal investigations. While scene integrity is paramount, officers have a duty to gather all relevant information, and a brief, controlled interview of a witness is a standard and ethical procedure that does not necessarily compromise the scene. A further incorrect approach is to focus solely on the civilian's potential involvement in the crime, rather than on securing the scene and gathering initial information about the incident itself. This is professionally unacceptable because it prematurely shifts the focus of the investigation without proper cause and neglects the primary responsibilities of an officer at a crime scene: to ensure safety, secure the area, and begin the process of information gathering. This could lead to a missed opportunity to gather vital evidence or witness accounts related to the actual crime. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes scene security and evidence preservation, while simultaneously recognizing the importance of witness cooperation and information gathering. This involves a systematic approach. First, assess the immediate safety of the scene and any individuals present. Second, establish a secure perimeter. Third, make a preliminary assessment of the situation and identify key individuals, such as witnesses or potential victims. Fourth, attempt to obtain brief, initial statements from witnesses while ensuring they do not interfere with the scene. Fifth, request appropriate specialized units based on the nature of the incident. This structured approach ensures that all critical aspects of the initial response are addressed in a lawful, ethical, and effective manner. Question 18. Governance review demonstrates that an LVMPD officer, while processing evidence related to a significant narcotics seizure in Las Vegas, inadvertently mishandled a key piece of contraband, compromising its chain of custody. The officer realizes the error after the evidence has been logged and secured. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officer to take in this situation? Adhering to Nevada law and LVMPD protocols. Option A. Immediately report the compromised evidence to their supervisor and the district attorney's office. Option B. Dispose of the compromised evidence and proceed as if it were never collected to avoid complications. Option C. Attempt to discreetly correct the evidence handling error without informing anyone to avoid disciplinary action. Option D. Repackage and relabel the evidence to appear as if the error never occurred, then proceed with the investigation. Correct answer is A. Immediately report the compromised evidence to their supervisor and the district attorney's office. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an LVMPD officer regarding the handling of evidence that has been compromised due to a procedural error. The core difficulty lies in balancing the imperative to uphold the integrity of the justice system with the practical realities of law enforcement operations. A misstep in handling this evidence could lead to its inadmissibility in court, jeopardizing a prosecution and potentially allowing a suspect to evade accountability. This requires careful judgment, adherence to established protocols, and an understanding of the legal ramifications of evidence tampering or mishandling. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately reporting the compromised evidence to a supervisor and the district attorney's office. This approach is correct because it prioritizes transparency and adherence to the Nevada Revised Statutes, NRS, concerning evidence handling and chain of custody. NRS 179-245 mandates that all evidence collected must be properly secured and accounted for to maintain its integrity. By promptly notifying supervisors and the DA, the officer ensures that the appropriate legal authorities are aware of the situation. This allows for a formal assessment of the evidence's admissibility and the development of a strategy to address the procedural lapse, which might involve seeking court orders for its re-examination or explaining the circumstances to the court. This proactive disclosure is crucial for maintaining the credibility of the investigation and the LVMPD. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to report the compromised evidence and attempting to conceal the error is a severe ethical and regulatory failure. This directly violates the principles of honesty and integrity expected of law enforcement officers and contravenes the spirit, if not the letter, of NRS statutes related to evidence integrity. Such concealment could be construed as obstruction of justice or tampering with evidence, leading to disciplinary action, criminal charges, and the complete dismissal of the case. Attempting to fix the evidence without proper authorization or documentation is also a critical failure. This bypasses established protocols for evidence handling and chain of custody, which are designed to prevent any perception of tampering. Any alteration, even with the intention of correcting a mistake, can render the evidence inadmissible and undermine the prosecution's case. This action disregards the meticulous procedures outlined in LVMPD policy and state law designed to ensure the reliability of evidence. Discarding the compromised evidence without consulting supervisors or the district attorney's office is another unacceptable approach. This action prevents any possibility of the evidence being used, even if its compromised state can be explained or mitigated through legal channels. It constitutes a failure to follow proper procedures for evidence disposition, and can be seen as an attempt to unilaterally decide the fate of crucial case material, which is outside the officer's authority and undermines the judicial process. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and departmental policy. When faced with a procedural error impacting evidence, the immediate steps should be: 1. Recognize the potential impact on the case and the integrity of the investigation. 2. Consult relevant statutes and departmental policies regarding evidence handling and reporting. 3. Immediately report the issue to the appropriate supervisory personnel, and if necessary, legal counsel, district attorney's office. 4. Document all actions taken and communications made regarding the incident. This systematic approach ensures accountability, transparency, and the best possible outcome for the justice system. Question 19. During a lawful traffic stop in Las Vegas, Nevada, for a minor traffic infraction, an LVMPD officer observes the driver exhibiting nervous behavior and making furtive movements within the vehicle. The officer has no other immediate indicators of criminal activity beyond these observations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer to take to investigate further while respecting the driver's rights? Option A. Immediately demand consent to search the vehicle, stating that the driver's nervousness suggests they are hiding something illegal. Option B. Terminate the stop and allow the driver to leave without further inquiry, as the observed behaviors do not constitute probable cause for a search. Option C. Proceed to search the vehicle without consent, assuming the driver's behavior indicates probable cause for a search. Option D. Articulate the specific observations of nervous behavior and furtive movements as the basis for reasonable suspicion, and then request voluntary consent to search the vehicle. The correct answer is D. Articulate the specific observations of nervous behavior and furtive movements as the basis for reasonable suspicion, and then request voluntary consent to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an LVMPD officer to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a traffic stop. The officer must act swiftly, but also adhere strictly to the legal boundaries established by Nevada law and the U.S. Constitution, specifically the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Misinterpreting the scope of permissible inquiry or action can lead to evidence suppression, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer clearly articulating the specific, articulable facts that led to the reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, thereby justifying the continued detention and the request for consent to search. This approach aligns with the legal standard established in Terry v. Ohio and subsequent interpretations, which permit brief investigatory stops and frisks when an officer has a reasonable, articulable suspicion that a person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime. By stating the observed behaviors, e.g., erratic driving, furtive movements, and explaining how these behaviors contribute to a suspicion of a specific crime, e.g., Dewey, possession of contraband, the officer establishes a lawful basis for their actions. Seeking consent to search, after lawfully detaining the individual based on reasonable suspicion, is a permissible investigative technique, provided the consent is voluntary and not coerced. This method respects the individual's rights while allowing for thorough investigation based on objective facts. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the officer demanding consent to search based solely on a hunch or a generalized feeling of unease, without any specific, articulable facts to support a suspicion of criminal activity. This violates the Fourth Amendment's requirement for reasonable suspicion to justify a detention beyond the initial traffic infraction. Another incorrect approach is for the officer to proceed with a search without obtaining consent and without probable cause, relying on the assumption that the driver might be hiding something. This constitutes an unlawful search and seizure. Finally, an officer who uses the threat of further detention or arrest to coerce consent to search is also acting improperly. Coerced consent is not voluntary and is legally invalid, rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible. Professional reasoning. When faced with a situation requiring a decision about further investigation during a traffic stop, an LVMPD officer should employ a systematic approach. First, assess the totality of the circumstances, identifying all observed facts and behaviors. Second, determine if these facts and behaviors, when viewed objectively, rise to the level of reasonable suspicion that a crime beyond the initial traffic violation is occurring or has occurred. Third, if reasonable suspicion exists, articulate these specific reasons clearly. Fourth, consider investigative steps that are proportionate to the level of suspicion, such as requesting consent to search, ensuring that any request for consent is voluntary and not based on coercion. Throughout this process, adherence to the Nevada revised statutes and the U.S. Constitution is paramount. Question 20. Process analysis reveals that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, LVMPD, anticipates a significant increase in calls for service during an upcoming major public event in Las Vegas, Nevada. To ensure adequate staffing and response capabilities, the department must allocate overtime hours. Given that the event is projected to increase call volume by 25% compared to a typical weekend, and historical data shows that during similar events, officers typically work an average of 8 overtime hours per event, with 150 officers available for overtime duty, and the average cost of overtime is $75 per hour. What is the estimated total overtime cost for this event? Option A, $200,000. Option B, $150,000. Option C, $225,000. Option D, $180,000. Correct answer is C. $225,000. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Nevada, managing limited resources during a period of increased demand. The critical element is the need to allocate overtime hours effectively to address a projected surge in calls for service related to a major public event, while remaining within budgetary constraints. Mismanagement can lead to understaffing, officer burnout, and a diminished capacity to respond to emergencies, impacting public safety and the department's reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a data-driven calculation of overtime needs based on historical data and projected event impact. This method directly addresses the core problem by quantifying the required resources. Specifically, it involves calculating the average number of overtime hours worked per officer during similar past events, factoring in the expected increase in call volume, and then determining the total overtime budget required. This aligns with principles of fiscal responsibility and operational efficiency mandated by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's LVMPD internal policies and Nevada state budgeting guidelines, which emphasize prudent allocation of public funds and ensuring adequate staffing for public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply allocate overtime hours equally among all available officers without considering the projected workload or the specific needs of different units. This fails to address the actual demand and can lead to overspending in areas that don't require it, while understaffing critical response units. It disregards the principle of efficient resource allocation and can contribute to officer fatigue in areas with higher call volumes. Another incorrect approach is to base overtime allocation solely on officer seniority or personal requests, without a quantitative assessment of operational needs. This is ethically problematic as it prioritizes personal preference over public safety and departmental operational requirements. It also violates principles of fairness and merit-based resource distribution, potentially leading to resentment and decreased morale. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the projected increase in call volume and maintain the standard overtime budget. This is a direct failure to adequately plan for foreseeable operational demands. It risks understaffing, increased response times, and a compromised ability to maintain public order during the event, directly contravening the LVMPD duty to protect and serve the citizens of Las Vegas. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic, data-informed approach to resource allocation. This involves 1. Identifying the operational challenge, increased demand during an event. 2. Gathering relevant data, historical call volumes, event attendance projections, officer availability. 3. Performing quantitative analysis to determine resource needs, calculating required overtime hours and budget. 4. Aligning the plan with departmental policies and budgetary constraints. 5. Regularly reviewing and adjusting the plan based on real-time operational feedback. This structured process ensures that decisions are objective, justifiable, and effectively serve the public interest.